And then I also found, 3 bathrooms that had tile and grout showers over a green board, which is
Mhm.
essentially paper-backed, moisture-resistant mold food, right? That they used for about 40 years in showers. And moisture gets behind 8 out of 10 showers. I put my meter on.
Hello, and welcome to Your Indoor Air podcast brought to you by Change the Air Foundation. My name is Kendra Seymour, and today I'm joined by John Skelly, and we're going to be talking about the importance of finding a good indoor environmental professional or an IEP, what that person does, some of the common pitfalls you might face when it comes to inspections and remediations, and how you might even go about prioritizing problem areas, in your home based on severity and some other tips that John's going to share with us today. There's so much great information. And so I think anyone listening, whether you're a homeowner or renter, you're going to walk away today with some practical tips. Now, before I tell you a little bit about John and welcome him, I do want to take a moment to thank 2 of our sponsors, MV Restorations and Home Safe Mold Inspectors of NWA. And we so appreciate these companies, not just for the work that they do, but for their generosity, because it's what helps keep our resources free, makes our policy and advocacy work possible, and supports all of our research grants. So a huge thank you to those sponsors, and you can learn more about them if you head on over to changetheairfoundation.org and click on our corporate partners tab. So that said, John, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I want to applaud you for everything you've been doing just with the Facebook groups and, you and your colleagues with this Change the Air Foundation. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of what you're doing, so I'm truly grateful to be here.
Thank you. And you as well. We actually connected over Facebook, and I know you're doing a lot to help people. And I know it's important to you that people live in healthy homes and breathe safe indoor air. And so we're all about that. So for those listening, if you don't know John yet, he is a council certified indoor environmental consultant. He's a New York State mold assessor and a US EPA lead and asbestos inspector. He began his career in the environmental mold, water damage, and air duct cleaning industry in 2003. And he is also the owner and operator of HNST Mold Inspections. So you've been in business a long time. I know you've seen a lot. I know today we're going to talk about some of the, some specific actual real world scenarios that you've seen. So I'm excited to jump in. But for anyone listening, maybe they're newer to mold. And I remember being here once upon a time when I first found mold and water damage. I thought I was supposed to call a mold remediation company first. And then I learned about this amazing person, an indoor environmental professional, or an IEP for short, and what they do. So can you kind of orient everyone and kind of tell us, like, what is an IEP and what does a good one do?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So an IEP it's a designation. It's not a certification of any kind. And it's unfortunately, it's not a gauge of anyone's experience, good or bad. I became an IEP back in 2010 after a 2-day class.
Right.
Now I did have 5 years of practical hands-on remediation experience, behind me, but not all IEPs are made the same, right?
Amen. We say that all the time at the foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, so it can be very challenging to kind of navigate, and find who is good, who is not so good, and again, what you're doing, with the foundation is empowering people, giving them the information, the questions to ask. I love when a potential client interviews me. I mean, because all my interviews and client vet me over the phone, and I love when they have their list of questions, right? And you can sense the confidence that they have, on the other side of the phone because they have that information to go with, to ask you and try to interview you. So, I mean, a good IEP, really should have the ability to be able to, properly diagnose a home. They should ideally be versed in multiple facets of the indoor environment, and it's not to knock a 2-day certification or a 2-day class. I mean, look, we all have to start somewhere, right? But understand mechanical systems, understand ventilation, drainage, all because there's so many moving parts in a house, and often a homeowner doesn't understand many of these, components. And so for a good IEP to be able to help the customer not only understand that they have mold, but why they have mold, why they have an indoor air quality problem, what is the remedy, and what is the solution? What are your preventative measures? So those are some of the things I think that really make a good IEP.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head with so many points that we talk about a lot at the foundation. And if anyone has gone to our Start Here tab under our resources, we talk about exactly what you said, that, unfortunately, not all of them are created equal, because sometimes we see, and I know I had this kind of inspector once upon a time, and I see this, they come in and they'll just take a couple air samples throughout your home and they call it a day, and they're not looking around, they're not doing the investigating, they're not going that step further. And the home really is a system, and I love that you talk about it. So we'll probably get into this a little bit more about what an inspection looks like for you. But in your opinion, is there some key, I don't want to say red flags, but things that people can look out for, maybe when they're calling an IEP and they're interviewing or vetting them over the phone, that kind of separate the so-so IEPs from those who maybe are a bit more knowledgeable and maybe more likely to give them a better outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that, one of the things that I know I do personally is I try to, express a genuine interest in the customer or the potential client's issue, right? And I ask a lot of questions and, try to help understand, what's driving the call. Why are they calling today? So that genuine interest is often something that someone should look out for, if the person is trying to, kind of just spend their time answering maybe some questions. And um, a red flag would be, maybe a company who's immediately leading with testing, asking how many rooms do you have, and we got to do an air test in each room. That's really more of a, kind of what we call a mold testing company, because there's a real distinction between a mold inspection company and a mold testing company. Mold inspection companies really spend the time, to investigate the house and, spend time understanding the building history, understanding, occupant complaints, so that's some of the things that people maybe watching should be looking out for when you're interviewing an IEP. Is just, are they asking you questions? Are they showing you an interest in maybe what's going on in your house? And because they're all really important factors at the end of the day, right? Because when we're doing an assessment, you're putting puzzle pieces together,
Yeah. Yeah.
and things are, that they're all part of it, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that clue, right? Like they should be asked, well, why are you calling? Like, what's the health? What's the history of the home? Testing is only one piece of the puzzle, but I think unfortunately it's where a lot of people lead with, and they rely on that and only that. And so I know that, I imagine when you go through homes of your clients, like it's a multi-hour inspection. Like, are you getting up in the attic? Are you poking around, just quickly? Because I'm sure that could be a whole episode. What's your approach? Like, where do you start?
Well, I always say when my clients ask if I'm going to the attic, I say yes, but under protest. I don't. Who likes to go into an attic? But yeah, I mean the average inspection will run, standard size house, 1,500 to 2,200 square feet or so. Will average about 3 hours on
Yeah.
site. It goes, and that's before doing any testing or anything like that. That's before doing any potentially invasive inspection. That's just going through the house. We generally start top to bottom. I'm sorry, bottom to top rather. We inspect the basement, crawl space, do a room by room inspection. Look at all the HVAC registers, floor vents, ceiling registers as we're going through the room. Carefully inspect the ceilings, wall surfaces, infrared scan, moisture map, or leak detection survey of all surfaces, toilets, showers, under sinks, anywhere there's a weak spot in the building envelope, right under the windows, chimneys, skylights, etc. Open up the HVACs, disconnect ductwork. So it's pull back insulation in the attic. We can't see everything, of course, but we try to look for some red flags and, areas that we might, and a lot of times we're not necessarily finding mold, we're finding red flag areas or areas that, we're going to put a sticker on and say, look, this is a potential hotspot,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, because it all starts with moisture. If you didn't have moisture, you're not going to have microbial growth. And so, It's looking for those things. I love it. You're like this detective, essentially for the home, which I think is just so cool. Now, sometimes we get people saying that, well, maybe they bought a new home or they're under contract to buy a new home. And they think, well, I'm just going to hire a home inspector, which is great. They have their skill set and they do certain things. What is the difference, though, between a home inspector and what you do? And when might someone want to hire both?
Okay, so it's a good question. Great question, actually, because I think unfortunately the mold inspection business, it's secondary. It's considered secondary. It's considered less important to a home inspection. Home inspectors are, and it's not knocking them at all. They're generally lauded as all-knowing, right? Home inspectors are generalists, would be a good way to, like a general practitioner.
Sure.
If you're hiring a good mold inspector, a good IEP, environmental consultant, they're specialists, right? Or they're going to specialize in several fields. And I tell my client, all my potential clients, this is the lens that I look at a house through is very different than the lens of a home inspector. And what they do is absolutely invaluable in the purchase of a new home. But unfortunately, mold inspections, like I said, there's so many factors, there's a kind of a philosophy that if the person doing the inspection is not qualified to evaluate mold, test mold, write a remediation plan about mold, or diagnose the underlying cause, if they don't find anything, then you don't need a mold inspection. And it's completely reversed, right? And what happens, especially in today's market, it's really tough for people because they're spending, thousands of dollars on inspections, and they start cutting, corners, and they genuinely feel that the home inspector is, going to find things. But it's a very, very different inspection. And, we often do find a lot of things that home inspectors don't see.
Yeah. So it's worth, I think, sometimes people doing both, especially if you're still in a position to negotiate, because you can either negotiate money back or interventions that can save you, time and money in the long run. Or maybe you uncover something and you're like, listen, I can't deal with this. And you pass on the home, which is never what we want to see. But I mean, sometimes that's the reality.
Well, you want to be informed. You
Right.
want to be informed. You want to have the right information going in, and make an informed decision if the seller is going to work with you, or or not, or if this is something, if you love the house, you're willing to take it and eat the cost of the remediation. If you really love it. But
Yeah. And I think too, like, I think people are always on the search for like that perfect home. There is no perfect home, right? Most homes are at some point in their life are going to have a problem, and we have to be okay with that. And our job as homeowners is to catch problems as early as possible, prevent them if we can, and then just deal with them safely and correctly. Because I think if someone's gone through this, I think sometimes there's some very real PTSD, and they're like, I never want to have a mold problem. Like, I'm going to move into, a new home or a different home, and I'm never going to have to worry about it. And, like our homes are made of tens of thousands of parts, and we have a responsibility. That's probably a whole nother talk about things that we can do as homeowners and renters to kind of maintain and prevent some of that moisture. Maybe you'll come back and do that. But I did want people to know, like, you don't need to find a perfect home. And it starts with just being knowledgeable. So I guess my question then, kind of shifting a little bit along that track of, let's say you're in a home, right? And your IEP has gone through and they've found a number of problem areas. And let's be honest, most of them don't have like a big pot of cash. And we have to prioritize. And sometimes we have to do the best that we can with the circumstances. So how do you help your clients, maybe if they have multiple problems, prioritize, like, well, let's start here and first, and then as resources and time allow, you can dig into some of these other problem areas. Do you have any advice for your clients or a way you approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was asked a couple of years ago to put my business in one word, and I said perspective, right? If we can try to, put everything into perspective for our clients, right? Because obviously there's so much information in, the modern era, right? Whether it's news, whether it's, mold groups, whether it's, opinions, right, from different professionals, online blogs, et cetera. There's so much information. So what I often try to do what I do is consolidate that information and try to, funnel that down into a digestible, understandable um, consultation for my clients, right? So they can really understand, because again, not all, it's very important, I think, to put mold in its, respective boxes, essentially, right? Because nothing should ever be dismissed, right? Because, obviously the industry has evolved so much over the last few years. I mean, again, what you're doing with the group, the awareness, functional medicine doctors, right? People who have been undiagnosed for years, who are finding out that, mold has been, an underlier for so many ailments, right? So the industry has shifted in a lot of ways. I know myself as a consultant, I have evolved so much over the last several years, right? To never be dismissive of anything, right? Even if it is a very small amount of mold, right? But at the same time, not all mold is bad. Not all mold is going to necessarily create serious problems inside the house or be a serious problem inside the house. Because I think if we're making everything really, really bad, then things that are really bad, how do we,
Mhm.
differentiate? So, I'll give you an example. I had a client yesterday. They bought the house 5 years ago. Everyone's been symptomatic, right? Brain fog, migraines, chronic stuffiness. And I found a bunch of hidden mold in the basement, under the carpet, inside the walls. And then I also found, three bathrooms that had tile and grout showers over a green board, which is
Mhm.
essentially paper-backed, moisture-resistant mold food, right? That they used for about 40 years in showers. And moisture gets behind 8 out of 10 showers. I put my meter on. So these are always something that I've always known. This is a potential source of mold, but I take it a lot more seriously than I did years ago, understanding that, this could be a serious problem for someone who's sensitized. But I put that further down the list of priorities, because the basement was an area that they spent so much time in. It was their playroom. They hung out there. And that was where all the real true exposure was happening. Not that the stuff behind the walls may not have, but, the basement was put in order of top of priority. And then, there's some moisture under some of the vinyl floors in one of the bathrooms, and toilet seals were leaking, and all those areas where moisture is getting under tile floors. You can have moldy plywood underneath. Um, but that was put a little bit further down, not to be ignored, and definitely on the remediation list, but maybe at a later date, because obviously when you start talking just the remediation and then the reconstruction costs on top of that, it's I tell all my clients this, there's often a knee-jerk reaction to, I start pointing things out and people will start throwing things out immediately. And I'm like, just wait, let's just try to put everything in perspective for a minute. You're going to sit down, and once you get my report, you can have a conversation, and you're going to think long and hard about how emotionally, financially invested you're going to get with this project, because there's so many things to think about, you know.
Yeah. And I think too, like you get a report, I imagine like that, but I've been that person and you're so overwhelmed, like you don't even know where to start. And I think that's where a good IEP like yourself or someone who's going to help you kind of understand that report and not just email it to you and be like, here you go, have a nice life, like helps you prioritize where to go. Because I think otherwise you kind of hit that panic button. I always say it's important to research before you react. Like take a moment, take a deep breath, and like figure out your next step. Don't worry 10 steps down the road. So I imagine like another priority or area that makes sense if they're in the basement, but if it had been in a bedroom where you sleep or spend a lot of your time, like you're thinking about things like that for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's often, I field a lot of calls, where potential clients have been, interviewing other companies, and, they get it, or have an understanding that's very important to understand the levels of mold in the home, and it's
yeah.
really, there's really no such thing in a sense, particularly when we're talking about air samples, because there's so many variables, and you could get a very high air sample, or you could take a swab sample and there's mold on one beam in the basement, right? Or there's mold on 20.
Yeah.
There's people with symptoms, or there's mold in the ventilation system, right? You know what I mean? So there's so many factors that you have to look at when we're basing severity, a client asked me that yesterday, and we had, I think the mold was maybe 2 inches off the ground, but it was around the whole perimeter of the basement. And he's asking me, how bad is this? And my business, I've seen black mold 8 feet up the walls, right? Obviously, that's being the worst. But I
Yeah.
said, your family's symptomatic.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter how little there is, right? Because we're looking at the big picture,
Yeah.
right? So it's important to try to put things into perspective for the client, you know.
That's so important. So important. I mean, okay, and you were talking about some of your clients. You not long ago posted a reel on your social media of one of the worst remediation jobs you had ever seen. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could talk about that. And you talked about I believe you went back to the home because you were doing post-remediation verification, which is post-testing. So maybe you can also give us a little lesson in that for those who aren't familiar. But can you tell us about that job? Because it was mind-blowing, the videos.
Yeah, so that was, yeah, that was really bad. So what that was this woman came home from a 2 week vacation. She came home to steam damage, right? The hot water heater was leaking, and steam damage is pretty epic when we talk about mold, because steam travels. It travels up through wall cavities, it travels through ceiling and plumbing chases, right? It finds basically a path of least resistance, and it starts condensing and it starts colonizing very, very fast because of the water vapor and the temperature of the water, right? So she had had we'll go to the backstory too much, but she had had a water damage restoration. And when we were called in, obviously we wrote up a remediation plan, which involved, ripping up subfloor, basically all but gutting the basement. You had to do significant structural cleaning, right? Because the mold was just so visible, so amplified on the wood. And this company went in and literally just took an airless sprayer and sprayed it right over it. And they made zero effort, zero attempt to clean the wood. I mean, this is as bad gets. I mean, this is not the industry standard, unfortunately, is poor,
Mhm.
right? When we talk about remediation. Um, but most companies make an effort.
Right,
Right?
right. This is the worst case scenario, folks. So like there's a big spectrum here, and I'm just highlighting this though because it does happen. Know that good remediation is possible, but this story I think has a lot of lessons to be learned, for people.
And the one thing I'll say is that, unfortunately, some of it came down to lack of consumer awareness, right? In the sense that, I had to ask the homeowner. I said, "Look, did you show them my report?" So I gave it to them. I'm like, "Did you go through it line by line with, what they were going to do versus," unfortunately, it was no. And sometimes we're trusting the professionals, to come into our house, but it really behooves the homeowner to be as informed and as involved in all aspects of the remediation as much as possible, right? To making sure that the job is being done properly, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean, that's why I love like when you hire an IEP, part of that should be that if warranted, if you need remediation, they're going to write a plan based on what is best and safest for you, not what is fastest or cheapest or easiest for the remediation company. And so again, it's like people think, oh, it's one more cost, but I think it's so important to protecting your overall investment, to ensuring that maybe remediation gets done right the first time, that all of these things are in place. That to me, it's just such a helpful piece for the puzzle. And we get that it's costly. So when you went into this home, can you tell us a little bit about what you saw? That
in,
was just like, holy moly.
in that that's that same home you're talking about. Actually, just real quick, like what you're saying about that additional cost. I mean, what actually happened in this situation now is another company has to come in. I'm actually going back to check this job on Friday. They had to grind all the paint off of the structural wood. So in essence, I hope she got a refund. I'm not sure if she did, but in essence, it set her back because a job now took more time, to have to get all that paint off to properly re-clean and reseal the wood. So it was a setback. What did I see? I mean, I just saw, just dirt and debris and just big areas of mold just painted over, no containment, no machines. I mean, it was just, sheetrock crumbs everywhere. It was just absolutely horrible, absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Sad.
Well,
said,
I'm glad she has you though to help maybe kind of right this ship and right the wrong. But and as someone who has made the mistakes and hired the wrong company and had to go back and have areas redone, I've been there. So if you make that mistake, like give yourself some grace and move on and head on over to our website because we have some really good strategic information. I write all of our resources because I've been there. I know what it means to make those mistakes. So hopefully you can learn from John's client's mistake, from my mistakes, and make smarter choices than what we did. So and not to get too broad here, but you kind of talked about the restoration industry. I've often said that it's like the Wild West. What is one of the biggest issues in your opinion with the restoration industry following like a water event?
um, well, how many? So one of the biggest issues I think I find is remediation restoration companies are often too worried about direction of payment, right? Who's paying us, right? So when there's a flood, there's water damage in the basement, and they'll go in and they'll immediately set up drying equipment and they'll start maybe cutting out walls. But then the insurance company says, well, we want you to dry the floors.
Mm.
But we really know those floors need to come up. And instead of relaying the information to the homeowner, the insured, saying, look, doesn't matter what the insurance company is saying. It's going to cost extra X, Y, and Z. We really need to remove these floors. Let's just do it. Sign here, right? Oftentimes, the restoration companies will just don't say anything to the homeowner. They do what the insurance company asks them. They pull their machines. They get paid. They walk away, move on to the next one. Now, I'm not trying to paint the restoration industry with a bad brush, right? But unfortunately, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I do see worst case, scenarios and lack of communication, lack of saying to the homeowner, look, we got to cut these walls. I know the insurance company wants to dry them, but if we don't, you're going to get mold,
Yeah.
right? And they allow that time to go. They don't communicate to the insured, and the insured often thinks that we have a sense of entitlement as consumers, right? That the insurance, because we pay the insurance company lots and lots of money every year, which we do, that they are going to take care of everything, and often the insurance companies more and more nowadays are pushing back. Homeowners rely too much on the professionals, again, as we should, right? Whether it's in, when I bought my house, I trusted my realtors, I trusted the lawyers. There was some things that didn't go very well, we trust the professionals, but I think it behooves the homeowner again to just be as involved in the process as much as possible. I see homeowners because again, the insurance company is going to delay payment. They kick the company off the job, and my colleagues will have them sign a hold harmless when they go back 2 weeks later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because homeowner didn't want them. Well, the insurance company's not paying you. I'm not paying you.
Yeah.
So you need to leave until we get approval from the insurance company. By then, there's already a mold problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's much easier to fix a water problem quickly right away and prevent that bigger mold problem. But so often there's that delay. And I'm glad you brought up insurance because for anyone listening, and I don't know if it'll be out by the time this one drops, I have an interview with a public adjuster that it was going to blow people's mind on insurance and how to navigate that. So you'll want to check that out when it's out because it's a super stressful part of that whole equation. I get it. Like the money is not some endless, ATM for most of us. And so, but part of this means you have to, spend a little to, I think, protect your bigger investment and, not pay for it down the road. So then let's talk about a little bit about like a water damage. What are some of the mistakes that you see people making when they first, maybe they stumble upon, they like go down to their basement, haven't been down there in a while, and they realize that the water heater is leaking, or all of a sudden, water's coming in the back door. What are some of the mistakes, the things we shouldn't do when we first find or suspect, mold or water damage?
Okay, so I think when people first, discover water damage, I mean, let's say it's a mechanical failure, it's a hot water heater break or something like that. I mean, most homeowners, do respond. They call their insurance companies. Insurance companies send out, a restoration company. In a perfect world, everything is taken care of, right? Um, Situations where, maybe there's mold at this point, and you know, well, let me backtrack for a second. A lot of times, let's say there's a flood in people's basements, right? They don't have flood insurance, right? It's outside water. It's not a mechanical failure, so they got an inch of water. They got a half inch of water. They soak up the water. They put in some fans. They spray some bleach, and that's it. When water hits the floor, most sheetrock is installed touching or almost touching the slab, right? So it wicks the water up immediately, right? Maybe they dried out the carpet enough. Sometimes they ripped up the carpet, but the walls will often get moldy.
Mhm.
Right? And a lot of that is unfortunately, it's, they made best efforts as far as they were concerned, but there was this lack of, an understanding, so that's one of the issues I see. When homeowners do have a mold problem, and I have a lot of examples, unfortunately, and I have one from just last week where a woman whose basement had flooded multiple occasions, had a son who was symptomatic, lived in the lower level of the house, and had hired a mold remediation company to come in and remove mold in the areas that she thought she had mold. Right. That's one of the main differences, right? You hire a remediation company to come in 45 states in the country, there's no IEP, no independent parties required. So the remediation company asks Kendra, where's the mold? You say it's over here. Here's a price to remove it. That's it. In this case, she had mold in multiple other parts of the lower level of her house. She had mold under her furniture. And these are only things that are going to be identified during a detailed inspection. So one of the mistakes, again, is not, and a lot of people don't understand. They don't realize that they need to hire somebody. And this company that actually did the work in her house did it illegally under New York State law. They were a company that came from out of state, and just they diagnosed their own problem and gave her a price to do the work. And obviously, she was still left with a ton of mold in the house, and out X amount of dollars.
Yeah, I'll jump in there because I think sometimes too people think I'm going to call the mold company and they're going to come over and they're going to for free. And they think, "Oh, that's an inspection." No, that is an estimate. That's a sales pitch. That is not an inspection. That is not what John does. It's not what we were talking about because, if oftentimes you as the homeowner would be like, I know that's a problem. That toilet is leaking and I see the stain below. But what we're saying is you're bringing in someone else to kind of do that more thorough investigation of the whole thing, figure out how far, the extent, are there other underlying causes, are there other issues? And so that is so important. And please, for the love, and you said it briefly, like don't be spraying bleach on, like stop your spouse or whoever. Just you're better off not disturbing it. Would you agree with that, John, until you can bring in a professional?
100%, 100%. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people have the out of sight, out of mind concept,
Yeah.
right? Or the mold schmold attitude, I call it, where if we don't see it, it's not affecting us. And obviously we very much know that that's, not true, that obviously the residual spores, mycotoxins, et cetera, are, affecting people in a lot of different ways. So, a lot of it, I'm calling out the homeowners. You really need to pay attention to your house. You really need to be aware. And far too many homeowners are not aware. They don't stay on top of things. They don't run dehumidifiers. They're just not aware of their house. And there's a lot of things to understand. There's a lot of moving parts in the house. And again, sometimes it's reliance on the professionals. And, my AC, I have it serviced every year.
Yeah.
So my clients have the HVAC guy just snap a picture, right? We have
Mhm.
iPhones now, real easy. I have them show you the interior components. But
Yes.
countless clients with chronic sinus problems, and I go and I open up their air handler and it's full of mold. Their ductwork's full of mold, and they had it serviced every year. So there's that over reliance sometimes on professionals, that the assumption that they're going to notify us or do the right thing or even have the knowledge to know what they're looking at sometimes.
Well, I love that you mentioned that because we just had an interview with AJ Callaghan. He's an HVAC technician. And it's part 9 of our mold remediation mini class series for anyone who wants to take a deeper dive into their HVAC system. And he has been in the industry for like 2 decades. And he says this all the time. He's like, ask me how many units I've opened that don't have some level of microbial growth. And he's like 100%, unless it's a brand new unit or nearly a new unit. Now he's down in the South. But the point is, like, we have to be paying attention to these areas. And I love that tip. Snap a pic. Like, I actually do that with my HVAC people if I'm not also down there, because I also like to look for myself. And but I get it. If it's up in an attic or one of those places, you may not be crawling up there after. But that's such a helpful tip. I know we're running low on time, so I want to kind of pivot to our last question. You and I have talked before about remediation, and, it can kind of look a little different for everyone. And that's because each situation is unique. But there are some things that are the same for everyone, and there's some things that are different. Can you just kind of give us kind of your takeaways there on that?
Sorry, what was the question again?
So we had talked about, remediation might look a little different
Yeah.
depending on each of our situation. It's not necessarily a cookie cutter type thing. And I think it's because each person's house is so, unique, and their situation is different. So can you help us understand that when you've said that before, that remediation looks a little different for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of, just jumping back to one of the things about, one of the good things to look for in a good IEP is, a good IEP should be able to understand the needs of the client, right? Because clients are very different. You have clients who have no symptoms, you have clients who have allergy symptoms, asthmatic symptoms, then you have clients who have the inflammatory issues, right? So I always say that, during a remediation, we have to move the needle a little bit further, in one direction, but, depending on the needs of the client, right? So the one thing I do is I write the remediation plan the same. The report is the same in the sense, but everything is there. All the information is there for the client if they need it, right? Because we talked a little bit before about there's certain things. Obviously there's the dollar factor, right? Affordability, whether or not someone can actually afford to do everything as part of the remediation. But this is why I think it's, again, very important not to be dismissive of even small areas of mold, to make sure that everything is included in the work plan, even if it is a small area. You prioritize, put things in order of severity, at least so the client can try to understand what the priority should be as far as the remediation, and what things should be maybe worked on at a later date, or maybe don't need professional remediation. I know we don't like to encourage, DIY remediations, but there are situations. Again, it depends on the client. It really does depend on the client, and you can often feel the needs of the client. Sometimes people are very dismissive of mold, and they're going to do it the way they're going to do it regardless. And you just try to advise them as best as you can. And then there's the clients who really do lean on the expertise to guide them as best you can.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway here is, and I think anyone probably listening to our podcast or following along our resources is someone who is, committed to maybe learning more, or at least curious. And that really is like the first and most important step. And I think I say that to be empowering to people. Like, if you're listening to this podcast, you're already on your way to making smarter and better choices, and to understanding your home and your system a little bit more. And that's so important. John, this has been super great. If people had follow-up questions or wanted to get into contact with you, how could they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website's hnstmoldinspections.com. HNST is an acronym for honest, so remove the vowels. hnstmoldinspections.com. There's a contact form. You can look me up on Google. Phone numbers are there. On Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll link to that in the show notes. John also happens to be one of our amazing sponsors too, so he can be found under our corporate partners tab. So John, thank you for being that and supporting us and everything. It's been truly wonderful.
Yeah, it's been. I'm so happy to just be part of what you're doing. It really means a lot.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. More and more people talking about it and doing good work. It's going to make, our indoor spaces healthier for more people. And for everyone listening, do me a favor. If you found this helpful, head on over to changetheairfoundation.org and sign up for our newsletter, because it really is the best way to get great information like this directly to your inbox. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much.